People are fearful. The crime rate soars. Drugs are epidemic. Global warming threatens the planet. Everything causes cancer. People feel angry. Kids don't learn in school. The rich don't pay their share of taxes. The poor live off welfare. Our kids won't be as well off as their grandparents. Much of this fear and anger is fueled by statistics. Numbers thrown at us with the force of a hard fastball. But many of these fears are misplaced, much of the anger unjustified. Hang on, and we'll show you how numbers can manipulate opinions, how numbers can lie. People use numbers every day to mislead, so you need to develop a built-in warning system. Treat every statistic as an attempt to persuade. For example, this headline tells of a study showing that infants of mothers who drank bottled water during pregnancy had 15% fewer illnesses than children of mothers who drank tap water. Does this mean you should give a case of bottled water to anyone you know who's pregnant? As soon as you hear a number, 15% in this case, your built-in warning light should alert you to ask hard questions. For example, ask how mothers who drink bottled water differ from mothers who don't. Bottled water is a luxury, so buyers are probably affluent and have better health care. That might explain the difference. The water doesn't cause the 15% decrease in sickness. It's what number experts call a cofactor. It's there, but it's not the cause. This fictional headline is quite obvious. You know wearing shoes does not cause accidents. The shoes are merely a cofactor, an insignificant one, no doubt. But most statistics are not this obvious. How about an ad that claims 8 out of 10 of all road runners sold in the past 10 years are still on the road? Amazing, you say. My road runner will easily last 10 years. It must be built like a tank. But you should be asking questions. Is the road runner a relatively new model that sold very little during the early part of the 10 years? If the answer is yes, the real reason 80% are still on the road is that most were sold within the past few years. You are more likely to believe opinions backed by numbers. Exact numbers seem so scientific. That's one reason people use them to persuade. But every statistic deserves questioning. Hardly a week passes without some survey or opinion poll with shocking results. But opinion polls are tools of persuasion, shaped by how the questions are phrased, who asks the questions, and who sponsors the poll. For example, one poll asked if you were for or against a constitutional amendment forbidding abortions. 29% were for. 67% were against. But when the question was reworded to, are you for or against a constitutional amendment protecting the life of the unborn, then 50% were for and only 39% against. Or consider this. People were asked if they agreed or disagreed with this statement. Abortion is a private matter that should be left to women to decide without government interference. What percentage of women do you think would agree with this statement? The answer? It depends on who asks the question. When asked by a man, 64% of women agreed. When asked the same question by a woman, 84% agreed. A similar change occurred when men were surveyed. So who asks the question also changes the results. Many organizations with the message hire pollsters to produce a survey that will give the results they want. Here's an example. Should laws be passed so that special interests cannot give huge sums of money to political candidates? Yes or no? To this question, 80% said yes. But when the question was, should laws be passed to prohibit interest groups from contributing to campaigns, or do groups have a right to contribute to the candidate they support, only 40% said yes. Two groups were polled to measure how much television they watch. Group 1 marked their viewing on a scale that looked like this. It started at under 30 minutes daily and ended at more than 2.5 hours. The second group marked their viewing on a scale beginning at under 2 hours and ending at a maximum of over 4.5 hours. In Group 1, only 16% admitted to watching more than 2.5 hours. But in the second group, twice as many said they watched at least 2.5 hours. When given a range of numbers, people tend to select the middle and avoid the extremes. So which choices the survey offers shapes the results. In one famous study, people were asked for their opinion on the Public Affairs Act. Now, the fact that such an act was a complete fiction made up by the pollsters didn't stop a third of the people surveyed from offering an opinion about it. The moral of the poll, you can't interpret the results unless you know how the opinions were gathered. Why might people want to manipulate numbers about death and disease? Well, perhaps to scare you into getting a checkup, or push you to contribute money for research, or to pressure government officials to act. They believe in their cause, but it's still persuasion by numbers. Consider cancer rates. I can easily make a case for cancer as a spreading epidemic. I would use this graph showing cancer deaths on a steady march since 1900. Seems convincing, but your warning light should flash. What questions should you ask? Cancer deaths are concentrated among older people. And back in 1900, the average life expectancy was under 50 years. Most people simply didn't live long enough to die from cancer. The longer we live, the more likely we are to die of cancer, simply because we didn't already die of something else. Also, there are more people alive today, so more people die. If a cure for cancer were discovered, one of its side effects would be to dramatically increase the death rate from heart disease. All those people who don't die from cancer will still die, but from something else, often heart disease. But of course, that doesn't mean a cure for cancer causes heart disease. Death rates from most cancers, with the major exception of lung cancer, thanks to cigarettes, has declined in the past 20 years. This in spite of poor diets, pesticides, unclean air, and toxic dumps. The price we pay for using numbers to scare is misplaced fear. Many believe just about everything causes cancer, from chemicals in food to factories. So they place restrictions on their own freedom in a misguided effort to avoid very small risks. Statistics can add drama.
Blizzard death toll.
The news media often measure natural disasters in terms of counting the dead, but the numbers might mislead. What questions should you ask? How many died of heart attacks because of physical exertion? Would some have died of a heart attack a few days or weeks later, even without the storm? Some storms, whether snow or rain, keep people off the streets. But you will probably never read a story admitting that lives were saved because people who would have been killed on our highways stayed home. Is "Storm Saves Lives" just as truthful a headline? Let's say you run the local electric utility. You ask for a rate increase of 10%, say from 10 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. The increase will bring in an additional $10 million in revenue. You present those facts at a press conference. The next morning, you read these headlines in 3 newspapers. City Power seeks massive $10 million rate increase. City Power seeks 10% rate increase. City Power seeks modest 1 cent rate increase. Which one is correct? They all are. But readers might be more sympathetic to a 1 cent increase and be angered at paying an extra $10 million. Each headline puts a different slant or spin on the rate increase. You often see this type of selective reporting in labor disputes. The striking workers say, all we want is another quarter an hour. Management counters with unreasonable union demands of $200 million that would have to be paid by our customers. Illinois ranks 5th worst in childhood deaths from heart disease. The headline makes Illinois sound like an unhealthy place for children. What questions should you ask? One question you should have asked is, how does Illinois rank in terms of number of children living in the state? Answer, 5th, or very close to it. So Illinois is about where you would expect based on the number of children. The number does not show Illinois is dangerous for children. One survey shows we're eating more vegetables now than 10 or 20 years ago. But another survey shows we're more obese than ever. How can this be? Aren't veggies fat-free and good for you? What questions should you ask? One question you should ask, which vegetables are we eating more of? The answer, potatoes, mostly in French fries. Most of our increase in veggie eating is explained by more French fries. That might explain why we're more obese. But there's a second question you should ask here. How does the survey define obese? One sure way to create more fat people is to redefine obesity. Suddenly, folks who were somewhat overweight are now obese. Poll results are often presented to give them the best possible spin. Imagine you're the marketing director for a new shampoo, Green Mist. You've just seen the results of a user comparison with your main competitor who has controlled the market for the past 10 years. We'll call that brand Old Standby. People used both for a week and were asked which they preferred. Here are the results from 200 users. At first glance, it looks bad for your new Green Mist. Only 12% of the subjects preferred it to Old Standby. But watch how we can massage these results. We can use these numbers and claim, tests show 60% prefer Green Mist as equal or better than Old Standby. It's true. The key is to say equal or better. Everyone knows we are living in a time of unprecedented violence. Crime is at unheard-of levels and threatens to swamp our society. Even congressional leaders admit that since 1950, the rate of violent crime has increased by more than 500%, and they use numbers to prove it. As a newly trained number skeptic, your warning light goes on at the sight of the chart. What questions should you ask? You ask, what do they mean by crime? What is the source of the numbers? FBI statistics count only crimes reported to police. The Justice Department statistics are based on surveys and include unreported crimes. Naturally, the Justice Department finds a lot more crime, twice as many robberies, and 3 times as many violent crimes. A lot of crime goes unreported. So if you compare FBI statistics from 10 years ago with Justice Department statistics of today, you will find a huge increase in crime. But the increase does not necessarily mean more crime. It compares reported crimes of the past to reported and unreported crimes of today, apples and oranges. In the last 10 years, reported crimes have increased about 90%. But Justice Department surveys, based on reported and unreported crimes, show little or no increase. So what can we conclude about crime? That a lot more of it is reported now than 10 years ago. We depend on the police more. 911 numbers make reporting crimes easier. We cannot conclude the crime rate has increased. We can conclude crime reported to the police has increased. That's a major difference.
Good evening.
The news media loves a crime story. Blood and gore sells. Crimes 30 years ago were mostly local events. Today, a killing anywhere in the country becomes a quick clip on everybody's 6 o'clock news. The tragedy of manipulated numbers is that the fear and anger they generate lead people to take actions that degrade the quality of their lives and give only the illusion of security. Follow this. Fred was walking along one day and discovered a $50 bill lying on the ground. "It's my lucky day," he says. "I already have $100 to my name here in my other pocket, so I just gained 50%. Following me so far? Fred's doing all right. He's up 50%. Later that day, his luck changes. Thanks to a hole in his pocket, he loses the $50. So he says, "I had $150 and just lost 50. That's 1/3, 33%. So I just lost 33% of my money. But that's okay. Earlier, I gained 50%. That means I'm still ahead 17% for the day." Sorry, Fred. You're right back with the same $100 you started with. You're not ahead a penny. What is Fred's error in thinking? What questions should you ask? Fred fell victim to the mistaken belief that percentages going up equal percentages going down. Once down, you need a larger percentage just to claw your way back to where you started. If you own a $100 stock that goes down 20% one year and up 20% the next, you're still out $4. Or what about this headline? The word soars puts a spin on the 10% increase. But maybe the only reason the economy is up is that it was so bad last quarter. Unemployment is down 10%, but is it still too high? Is the leap in crime from, say, 10 arrests to 12 during the year? That is a 20% increase. Anytime a number measures an increase or decrease, you need to know the reference point. Beware of percentages, and be sure you know exactly what is being compared. Beware the phrase, "if current trends continue." History is filled with fearless predictions of gloom and doom based on that phrase. For example, at the current rate of inflation, the average house in 15 years will cost $1 million and be out of reach for all but the wealthiest. Or how about our country, or planet, is doomed by overpopulation? If current trends continue, we will run out of food, or insert any other natural resource such as oil, trees, or clean water. By the year, insert the year of your choice. This was the front page headline of the New York Times in September of 1948. The problem with "if current trends continue" is that they usually don't. Trends change. But what about the price of housing? The price will rise only to the capacity of people to pay. If I own a house, would I put it on the market for $1 million if I knew no one would buy it? Supply and demand adjust to maintain a market. In the morning paper, a researcher warns that blindness among the elderly will double in 35 years if current trends continue. What questions should you ask? One question you should ask is, how much will the elderly population increase in 35 years? The answer, it will double. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take care of your eyes, but it does mean there is no epidemic of blindness to fear. You could say, if current trends continue, this child will grow into a 12-foot giant. Remind yourself that current trends are just that, current trends. They are not fate. One tactic of number persuaders is to put the best possible spin on their numbers. Consider world population. If I want to make the planet appear overpopulated, I might use a linear measurement, such as, if all people on the planet were placed end to end, they would extend to the moon and back more than 8 times. But if I want to make the Earth appear less populated, I could use a measurement based on volume. If we give every human on Earth a cubicle apartment, a spacious one of about 20 feet on a side, all the cubes could easily fit inside the Grand Canyon. That makes it seem like there's lots of room left for more population. Both illustrations, by the way, are accurate. You need to talk back to that number, to ask questions. Here are some questions to ask. Ask, who says so? A study from a respected university shows eating salmon at least once a week can cut the risk of heart disease. Was the study paid for by the fishing industry? Don't assume that any study by a doctor, a laboratory, or a university is free of bias. Examine how the study was done. Ask, what's missing? In a recent survey, 4 out of 5 doctors preferred Pain-X to the other leading brand. But what if most doctors surveyed said they had no preference and didn't return the survey? That could mean most didn't prefer Pain-X. Ask if the numbers support the conclusion. Survey shows drug use rising among youth, claims the headline. The survey was conducted by a respected polling group over a period of years. They questioned 13 to 17-year-olds about their drug use. Do you see the problem with the headline? What questions should you ask? The problem is that the survey does not even attempt to measure actual drug use. It measures students' willingness to admit drug use. It's quite possible that drug usage and the willingness to admit it change at different rates. It also does not measure how much drugs are being used. The key is to ask questions and keep that early warning system ready to activate. Anytime you hear a statistic, assume someone is using it to persuade you. If you do, you'll be far less likely to be misled by numbers.